Okay, everyone, welcome to the final Q&A of the AIFF 2020 Virtual Festival. I'm Richard Herskowitz, the Artistic and Executive Director of AIFF, and I'm honored to have my Ashland Arts colleague, Nataki Garrett, here to conduct the Q&A with Garrett Bradley, whose two short films you just saw. Nataki is the Artistic Director of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and she's also a phenomenal theater director. In fact, she directed my favorite production of last year, How to Catch Creation. The person she's interviewing, whose first name is Nataki Garrett's last name, is Garrett Bradley. Garrett is the recipient of this year's AIFF James Blue Award, and she'll be back on June 14th for our awards night to accept that award. She got the James Blue Award for her featured documentary Time, which also won the U.S. Documentary Directing Award at Sundance, and Amazon Studios is going to release later this year. When that happens and theaters reopen, AIFF and OSF plan to jointly present this amazing documentary at the Varsity Theater in Ashland. But now to talk about the two short films, America and Alone, that Garrett Bradley made before Time, here are Nataki Garrett and Garrett Bradley.
Hi there, and hi Garrett. It's so nice to meet you after a kind of brief introduction to you through your amazing cadre of work. And I'm going to do a couple of introductory questions, and then I have some sort of deeper, visual space questions. But if you want to just tell us a little bit about your background in filmmaking and how you came to it. And then I'm going to ask a couple of questions about what's happening now. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'm so honored to be speaking with you. Thank you for taking the time to watch the films and also to come up with questions and talk with me. It's such a pleasure, and I feel like the festival's done an excellent job of meeting the needs of this time. So honored to be here. A little bit of background. So I started off actually doing photography. And I was lucky enough my parents are both artists. And so my mom had little things for me to tinker with at a pretty young age. And I think, for a lot of young people, it's having access to those things and someone encouraging you and giving you the confidence to act on your imagination and to be curious. And so I was lucky enough to have that. And, I did a lot of concert photography later on in life, like when I was in high school and college. And then I studied religion at Smith College. That's what I got my degree in. And I was really, I thought I was going to start off doing art history. And I actually found myself in religion because a lot of the images from early, when you're looking at, way back in the canon of art history, a lot of them are religious stories. And I was really interested in visual mythology. And I think that's actually what kind of got me into making films and being interested in moving images and storytelling. And I went to graduate school at UCLA because at that point I had not had any kind of formal training in film, but I didn't go to, and I promise this isn't a super long answer.
You're fine.
I think it's important because there's so much controversy for some reason around whether to go to film school or not go to film school, or, and for me, it was just an opportunity to get my hands on a camera and to work with people who are willing to work for free, when you don't have money to pay them. And to just understand the tradition of a medium that I was interested in, not necessarily so that I could master that specific aesthetic or approach or tradition. And I met Billy Woodbury there, who was a huge mentor to me. And Becky Smith as well, Nancy Richardson, who's an editor. And so really from that point on, I started making films, but not necessarily being comfortable, not necessarily feeling like I was achieving the mastery of the medium. I really was kind of still very much working off of my own impressionistic senses that I think I'd established many, many years before. And I think in working in documentary filmmaking, it's been an interesting challenge of how to work within that genre and try to push against some of the sort of aesthetic expectations that we have from one genre to the next.
Yeah, there's a lot in your work around that feels like it's about if documenting is allowing something to take place in front of a narrow field, and sort of capturing the movement or the experience or the emotion of that, to sort of shift this idea of what documentary filmmaking is, which is similar, right? It's about this narrow field, but your field allows for the lens to be the documenter and maybe not always necessarily listening for the narrative, which is really compelling, but also a relief. That what I experienced watching America was that I didn't have to learn in a conventional way about what it is that you were expressing. My learning was intrinsic. I could imprint my experience with your experience and then have a mutual kind of intersection understanding of what you were doing. And that leads me to my next question, which is just to take a detour before we come back to the actual films that you've made. We're watching right now a lot of documenting of people's experiences in the news media. Once again, there's a round of people's untimely deaths, and then there's another documenting of people's expression of fear and isolation and anger because of what's happening. I'm curious your response to that as a filmmaker, but also as a human being and a maker of things at this time, especially since we're all still supposed to be glued to our spaces, responding to each other in these little boxes, and that's a kind of outward space of response.
Yeah. Gosh, it's so funny you asked this question, because I was just looking at the news this morning. I was like, how am I going to do this today? Like, I just can't even.
Exactly what I felt today too. So yes, that's why I'm asking. I'm so glad you said it. What a relief.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's two ways of answering that question. I think the first is that I personally have a really hard time with violence, with the repetition of violent imagery. And it's a complicated thing, because as an artist, as a person who's making things, who's trying to contribute to the world, I would never want to set rules for what is the most effective in creating change. I think that those violent images are very necessary for a lot of people, and for a lot of different reasons. I think in my work, I try to grapple with the same questions and the same issues from a spectrum of beauty, from the belief that beauty and love and joy and pleasure can be just as radical in creating change.
Yeah.
And there was this is maybe a bit of a tangent, but I was watching this video of the CNN reporter when he was getting arrested. And it's such a profound moment, because you go through so many different stages of reaction as you're watching that. For me, I was at first really confused and frustrated as to why no one else on the reporter's team was stepping in and helping him. But then you start to see one by one, they all start to get arrested. And then I became extremely thankful for the camera person who did not cut the camera and allowed it to be live. And that kind of in and of itself in this present moment was a very radical thing to do, to not cut off the violence, actually. It's part of, from my understanding of what I think created protest during the Vietnam War. It was one of the few moments where you actually saw what was going on. And then, my generation, and I think our generation is been really used to the backdrop, the green screen. And the green screen wasn't there, and the camera kept rolling, and it was really powerful. And it brought so many questions into the role of journalism, to the role of war photography in those critical moments, and was actually really inspiring.
It's interesting about that, because I'm actually a Gen Xer, and so I have one foot in my understanding of what it was like before I experienced the transition of capture and lens and image, and then where we are now, which means that I live in this constant duality where my reaction is always hearkening back to what it was before, when I was a child in the 70s. And then this idea about what it became while I was studying. I went to Cal Arts for my graduate degree, and what I was studying and what image meant then and then now, and how to capture. I also spent a stint working at Third World Newsreel, which spent some time capturing a lot of that footage from protest during the 60s. And I have an intimate relationship with, I guess an emotional relationship with that work and what it does. Thank you for responding, because I was thinking today how difficult it is to move through the work that I have to do with that on my back. And I can't imagine that you are also moving through it without that same weight on your back. So to make space for it and acknowledge that is, I was like, I have to do that today.
Yeah, thank you.
With Garrett, I have to make sure that we've said it out loud. This is hard.
Yeah.
And it's hard to act like it's normal. You said some words just now that I thought, these are exactly the words that this other response to the violence, which is beauty and love and joy and pleasure. And I'm just going to look at Alone for a moment with you. And I have to say, it's been an emotional week for me. So I give myself the license, but I could not stop crying. And a lot of it is the audacity of this expression of joy, and this desire to get to this joy in the face of such profound circumstance. In the New York Times piece, you noted how loneliness felt through the lens of the physical limits of the warm sheets. How do these stories find you? There's this sense of like longing where she's laying there, and I just felt like I wanted it to stop, and I also wanted to hold her, and then I also felt like you let us be him for a moment. And was this short film something that you thought? Where did you find the need? What's it in response to?
Yeah, there's so I made a film in 2014 called Below Dreams, which was my first feature, and I cast that film almost entirely through Craigslist in New Orleans. And one of the men that I met, one of the actors I met, was this guy Desmond, who became a very close friend, and I became even closer to his girlfriend, Lon. And I want to say 3 or 4 years later, he'd been arrested, and it was this weird moment of, and I'm just going to be total, if I'm being completely honest, I was going through a really bad breakup at the time. It was a really tough moment, but I had a lot of resources. I had like all these meditations and like books you could read and articles, and like there was a plethora of resources for going through a bad breakup. And Lon had no one to talk to. There were no meditation apps or resources or articles about what it felt like to be a woman and to love somebody and to not be able to be with them and to not know what their future held because they were sitting in a private prison for 1.5 years before trial, to not know what direction to take in your life, to not be able to talk to your family, to your friends because of the stigma of incarceration. And so it just became a necessity for me on some level to think about incarceration from a Black feminist point of view, from a woman's point of view, and from the premise of love and personal experience. And I think that, Lon, really trusted that process and was really open with her vulnerability. And she talked to me a lot about the letters that they'd written between each other. And so it felt like, it just felt critical, and it felt that it was, as incarceration becomes something that people are finally talking about in a real way, and is actually getting traction in mainstream media, I think it's important that we tackle this issue from as many different points as we can. that it's not just the numbers and the statistics, it's also the human experience. It's also the effects of incarceration.
Yes.
And it's also the women, the Black women of America, who are holding it all together. So that's why I made the film.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's also beautiful in that it does provide the lens without objectifying her pain, or, you know, this, it really did kind of, like I said, my experience was this visceral reaction, this need to sort of get away from it while being drawn towards her and wanting to get to know her. It's not a traditional documentary, like you said. It feels really cinematic. And it takes a long time before we get to the sort of explanation of the piece. I'm curious about your relationships between your subjects and the story, and when you prefer to allow the camera to tell the story, when people tell their stories, and how you make those discoveries. Is it through a process, or do you know when you go into it that that's what you're going to do, or do you find it?
Yeah, I mean, the camera for me, and I really think about it more about the lens than the camera,
Yes,
is
yes.
not really telling the story. I think the way I've always thought about it is, first of all, the films I've made have come out of real relationships, or people who I actually know or that are in my vicinity already. And I see some kind of universal reason for why we can come together and make something that is going to contribute, you know, on a larger level. And so I think it's always been really important to get to know the people that I'm making the film with. So much so that I anticipate their behavior, I anticipate the structure of their day. And then that is what determines what's shot. So I think that's a really different approach from saying, okay, I understand why this is an important story, and I'm just going to be on the heels of this person 24/7 for 2 months or however long until the budget runs out, and then let's cut it and see what happens. I'm actually spending time saying, okay, this is what the message is, and this is how I'm going to curate our days to tell that thing.
I love that. So I'm a theater director, and I've never articulated what you just said, but it feels so familiar. I get to know the actors through the process of rehearsal, and then get to know the characters they're embodying through the process of getting to know the actor. And that requires that I allow for a certain amount of familiarity and connection and intersection and open conversation. And so it feels very similar in process, even though my medium is live on stage and your medium is through the lens. I wrote down the words so that I would remember. This next question is about the connection through the coloring that you use. You shoot in black and white, and in some moments it felt like you shot in sepia, and then sepia, and then in some other moments it was colored sepia, just moving from from Alone into America. There's this moment of where I think I perceive color because my brain fills it in, and then there are these moments where I'm like, I know there's no color, and I'm trying to figure out what is the imprint of black on white. And that seems to be a question that you're asking or offering in some of your films. Just looking at both Alone and America, your use of black and white and color is really exciting. I'd love for you to respond to that idea.
Yeah, I mean, I was cutting Alone while we were shooting America. And the reason, I mean, I think I was working on them both at the same time, remember that? But I think, I mean, first I'll start actually with America, because the choice of black and white was less aesthetic, although I'm really glad we shot it in black and white because I love black and white. It really was more about the archive and thinking about 35 millimeter film, and thinking about the sort of technical constraints of the time period that I was exploring. in that film. I had initially even thought of, shooting on cameras from the 1900s. Because I was really interested in storytelling without dialogue, storytelling within these same constraints that our forefathers had before us when we were making films. And then I was like, actually, no, let's not do that. Let's definitely shoot, on a newer camera. We've got these beautiful, lenses that we can play with, but black and white, and it being on film, and film being, again, not an aesthetic choice, but something, film itself still lasts, I think, at a minimum for 500 years if it's taken care of properly. There's no hard drive or cloud service that exists right now that can do that. And so it was really important that we made it on something that was going to last. So that's where the black and white came in. And I think that for Alone, I wish that I had like a deep reason for why I did that. I think I just liked the way that it looked. And then it wasn't until Lon and her boys saw the film, and I think it was one of them said, like, oh yeah, because this is what keeps things in the present moment, that it's the judicial system is very black and white. The black and white becomes a metaphor on many, many different levels. And I'm going to be honest with you, I was so simple. I didn't even think about that. But I like to use that because I think it's true. And it's what also then inspired what I consider the sister film to Alone, which is Time, helped with some of those aesthetic choices.
I love that it's Desmond and Lon that are like, unpacking these ideas.
Totally.
The artistic license allows you to just move on instinct, right? To be like, my gut's like this, and so we're just going to move there. But I like that other people they do have to find reason, and that reason actually is truth as well. I love that that's a part of it. So in America, I kept being moved by the fact that I wanted, so again, just speaking from as an audience member, my expectation was we were going to rest. There was going to be a moment of rest and unpack. And you denied that all the way through by making every moment was about movement. So even if we had a moment of solace, we had to, let's go, keep moving. Where I had to chase image a little bit, and I had to move something out of the way to get to, things were hidden. And I'm curious about how movement drives the work that you do, and what you're looking for in the lens in terms of movement. And again, it gave me another feeling of anxiety. I wanted to stop and rest, not because I felt like I should or I had to understand what was happening, but because the images felt critical of experience. And I didn't want to have the next one come yet because it was hard, to be honest. And so I'm curious about how do you feel about movement, and what does movement do for you in the lens?
Yeah, I mean, I think with that film, movement is really, it's about the chronology. It's a visual chronology in my mind. And we start in 1915 and we go all the way through 1926. And my research process was really looking at each one of those years and identifying a significant person or moment in Black history that was lesser known to us, and illustrating that visually. And in some cases, it wasn't even something that was explicitly Black. And actually, in some cases, it was things that were explicitly white, and counteracting the aesthetic of that and creating new iconography around that. For instance, the Boy Scouts of America were established by Woodrow Wilson in 1916. When we think about the Boy Scouts of America, we have probably not an image of Black kids wearing Black Panther hats. That's not a part of our visual library yet. And so I actually hope that this is a project that can continue on with other filmmakers and artists who are identifying moments in history that can be reclaimed, that can be rearranged and reoriented. um, and create new imagery for ourselves. And so I think that the movement was really about time, you know, going from 1915 to 1916 to 1970, 17, and so on. And there's an installation element of that film as well, which is something that you physically move through. So it kind of exists in these two different spaces, and maybe the two to inform each other on some level. In that
They
regard.
do. I mean, my experience was that they do. Especially because I like knew right away it was Bert Williams, and automatically I have a relationship to Bert Williams. There's a history with performance of Bert Williams, not just himself, but other people doing that. And I have experienced that history and performance for most of my career. I've had something or another, some documentary or some performance by Ben Vereen, or, you know, Edgar Arsenault is a really good friend of mine, and he did a piece about that. And so it did actually feel like the two things came together, found an intersection. It felt like it was moving a little bit like this, you know. So I have one last question about the film America, and that is, it has to do with sound. And how what is sound, what does it mean in your world? I felt like, when I was in grad school, I would go see these Antonioni films whenever they played at the Egyptian, or the Lindley's Film House in Pasadena. And what I loved about it is you sit in there and then you come out and I'm so aware of sound. And I felt something similar. The first time I watched America, I watched it just in this office, you know, with no headphones. And then the second time I watched it with the headphones, just to see if I'm having the same, because it felt sonically like my relationship was the same. And so then I was very aware of the details of sound and how disassociated, dislocated, incongruent it could become, and then how it could catch up with the film. I'm curious about how you find sound. What is the source material, and what are you looking for in the relationship between sound and image?
Yeah, well, so with America, I had the honor of working with Trevor Matheson, who was a member of the Black Audio Film Collective in the UK.
Yes.
And I, you know, I mean, there's a couple of ways of answering this, because I think Looking for Langston was a seminal work, and it's something that a friend had led me to see, like once I was cutting the film. I was so embarrassed that I hadn't seen this film. And Trevor had worked on that film. And there were a lot of different connections that were happening, I think, with what I was attempting to do, and with what that film had successfully done. And so when Trevor and I were sitting down, I kind of just explained to him, I gave him one word that I felt like each vignette meant, and he just went with it. he just did his thing, really. And then Udit Duseja, who did the mix, kind of blended a lot of that score into environmental sound, and really helped it, I think, to become what it is. Because we wanted to create, I think, a bit of a blurring line between sound and music. And for me, conceptually, that was important, because I was also trying to grapple with what it meant to make a contemporary silent film. And when you watch old silent films, it's just music. And then eventually it would be just dialogue and just music. And then you started to get into these more nuanced, like Foley, like someone's putting a cup down on a table, and the films we watch now are so noisy, for lack of a better phrase. There's so many different, we're literally hearing every single thing you could possibly hear.
Yeah.
And so what would it mean to kind of start to reverse engineer that? And that's really what informed a lot of those decisions.
I love that, because basically what you're saying is that sound is also being documented through its relationship to film image through time. There's a chronology to that as well, which is fascinating. I would like just knowing that. Actually, when I go back and watch it, I'm just knowing that just is so good and juicy. It's just so good. Thank you for sharing this with me. And this time, I want to leave with the hope and I'm looking forward to, I'll say that, I'm looking forward to what your work looks like in response to, you know, this time and where we are now, and where the world is heading. I like to say that I listen to the artists to tell me, you know, what the path is that we're on, because you all have an intrinsic ear to the ground. So I'm excited about what's coming, and I'm excited about your exhibition at MoMA, and yeah, I'm really excited to see where where your path leads. So thank you for this time.
Thank you so much for taking the time and for your beautiful questions. And I feel like we should hang out sometime. So
let's do it. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Let's make sure we exchange before the end of this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.